welcome to my webinar, my session, How to Lift Your Team Amid Disruption. This is part of RSM's Leading Through Change series. I'm absolutely delighted to have you here. And of course, in terms of my session, How to Lead Amid Disruption, this is a huge challenge. You face challenges such as disengagement and distraction and anxiety and fear. So it's a really important time to know the tips and techniques of how to get peak performance from yourself and from others. So this session of about half an hour will be full of science-based tips and techniques to try and help your team and yourself reach peak performance, whatever's going on around you. So let's get started, shall we? Everything I'm going to be exploring with you here is based on tried and tested techniques I've used with leaders and organizations around the world, both as my role as a program director at London Business School and direct as a consultant with organizations and boards of directors and various people in various industries. So everything I've used has been tried and tested, and I'm giving you the best stuff. So I'm hoping this will be really useful for you. I've also gathered a lot of the insights that we're going to be talking about in my book, The Human Edge. That was to answer the question, how can people future-proof their career amid this technological disruption? But interestingly, the superpowers that I identify in that book, some of which kind of appear in this session, are really appropriate, not just for technological disruption, but for any disruption. Okay, so for this particular session, we're going to be using my LIFT acronym, this LIFT leadership model, as I call it. We're going to be traveling through laughter, ideas, focus, and threat. And for each of them, I'm going to be giving you some psychological research, maybe some neuroscience research to show why I think this is really important as part of this model, and also then offering you some practical tools and techniques so you can go and try these things for yourself. I'll pause periodically to ask you a question so you can think about it and reflect and apply this to your own world. You're welcome to pause the video at that point and maybe write some stuff down. It's up to you. So let's get started. Now, obviously, I mentioned the acronym starts with L, but I thought it'd be a good idea just to start with threat, because amid disruption, this is often how we see change and often how our teams see change, as a threat. So the question that this session poses is, what can a leader do to transform a threat into at least a threat and an opportunity in the minds of his or her team? It's a really key transition to go through, and that will be the theme of the session. Okay, as mentioned, I work at London Business School and with various organizations as a leadership development and organizational change consultant. So disruption is not new to me. In the center there, you can see a picture of the COVID-19 virus. Of course, that's the latest disruption that we're traveling through now, but it's really only part of the last 10 years. We've been seeing the fourth industrial revolution driving massive accelerating change in our external world, creating through artificial intelligence and the associated technologies, a world that's volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. So what I'm seeing is organizations that don't just change a little bit and then stop. They're in constant change. So of course, they're requiring their managers and leaders within those organizations to be very adept at change themselves. So I think there's never been a greater need for future fit leaders. And by that, I mean people who can respond to disruption and change with agility, with creativity, with curiosity, and can encourage others to do the same. Because of course, it's not just technological disruption we're facing and COVID-19 currently. It is, of course, new generations coming into the business sphere, new digital tribes online connecting to each other in completely different ways. So we've got waves of disruption. And of course, in the background, we've got the ecological disruption of global warming. Okay, so we are in a world of disruption. I don't know about you, but I don't see the next 10 years being any less disrupted than the last 10 years. So I think people who can cope with that will be at a premium. Let's frame this with just some basic psychological insight about when we achieve this peak performance because to access curiosity and creativity, you need to be operating at a fairly high level. Now, this is kind of the result of decades of psychological research. You've got performance on one axis and arousal on the other. You could also call that stress. And we know one thing: there is a zone where we can achieve peak performance, but it's right in the middle of two zones where you don't. So if you are not quite stressed enough, not quite aroused enough, using the psychological term, you're asleep or you're bored or you're mildly alert, you're disengaged, and we know a lot of people feel that way about work. If you are too stressed, you are in danger of burnout. And we know a vast majority, for example, of visits to your general practitioner, your doctor, is a result of stress. It's an epidemic in our workplace. And there your body is drenched in cortisol and adrenaline. That's where creativity stops. Curiosity isn't possible. And of course, it has some very bad outcomes for us physically and mentally. A neuroscientist friend of mine said your prefrontal cortex, your brain, actually shrinks if you're too stressed all the time. So it's not a great place to be. In the middle is a great place to be. This is what I would call the Goldilocks zone, where you've just got it right. You're at your peak performance because you're not too stressed, but you're not too unstressed. You are curious, you're creative, you can solve problems, and this is where your personal development is. So how can we get ourselves and our teams in that place? This is some tips and techniques to help with that. So let's begin, shall we? Let's start with laughter. Now, you might be surprised that I put this right at the start of this model because, of course, disruption can be seen as a very serious thing. But the science that underpins the value of laughter in a team is very, very compelling. Laughter is a serious business when it comes to business, is what I like to say. So it's got some really, really great outcomes for you and your team. But instead of trying to explain it, let me just sort of demonstrate it. I don't know about you, but right now we are in COVID-19. But this webinar is for any disruption. This is just the latest of them. And during this period, I've been really interested and delighted sometimes by some of the humour that's come out of this very serious situation. This is one of them. In the UK, by the way, we call this guy Wally. I think this is the German version. This guy's all around the world. It's a child's game. You have to find Wally or Waldo in a crowded place, and you have his stripy jersey just to help you there. But of course, during lockdown, social distancing kicked in, and Wally's right there in the middle of a field. So, okay, maybe not the funniest joke you've ever heard, but if you even found that mildly amusing, your brain released some oxytocin that led to you trusting me a little bit more, feeling more engaged, and it's much more likely we can cooperate. So we've got outcomes for cooperation. If you can make someone smile, it can raise the levels of trust and they want to cooperate with you. It's also highly correlated with creative thinking. People can't be creative when they're feeling fearful and anxious. You have to have a lighter mood. So in terms of the outcomes that we want, we can get them through a lighter mood, a little bit more fun, a little bit more laughter. And as a leader, it's really compelling. There are many studies to show the outstanding leaders are seen as having a sense of humor. A sense of humor is seen as one of the most important things for a leader to have and display. There is even some research to show it's likely correlated with how much you get paid. So if you're a bit funnier, you might even get a bigger pay packet. But the bottom line, in terms of communicating, and that's what leadership is, you're a peddler of influence, you're a communicator. If you can wrap your message in with a joke, with a story, with a metaphor, with something a bit more creative, you're going to get people to trust you more, as I've just said. They're much more likely to listen. They will understand your message more if you've really sort of landed it with a joke. And these are the really key points. They're going to remember what you say, and they're going to take action more readily. And all the research points to that. So it's really worthwhile having that. Now, some of you may be a bit nervous here thinking, well, I'm not naturally a very funny person. I'm not some kind of stand-up comedian, Greg. What are you talking about? So just to be clear, here's some basic do's and don'ts on this. This isn't about becoming some kind of comedian. This is about just changing your attitude to work and bringing a little bit more fun. So some of the do's and don'ts: do know your audience and your medium. It's a little bit more different if different if you're face-to-face than you're online or in print or live like this. Know your context, and that's a sort of connection to know your audience. Of course, it's difficult to land jokes when you don't know who you're speaking to. So those are the areas of caution. And also, don't forget you're doing this for a purpose. You're a leader. You're not just trying to be funny. You're trying to actually convey a message. So what is it you're trying to convey? Is it your values? Is it the vision? What is it? What's the connecting thing that's bringing humour into it? Of course, don't punch down anything that's to do with racism or sexism and all those no-nos. Avoid anything that's even related to that. Don't try and be someone else. This is actually about being more authentic, not being less authentic. So it's about bringing your own personality and sense of fun into your leadership. And don't think it's risk-free. Any joke is kind of contravening the rules a little bit. There is a slight risk, but then, of course, there's a slight risk with any kind of leadership. So it's about mitigating that risk, but using it to really cut through with your message. Okay, so here's one of the questions I mentioned to you. Just a moment to pause, if you like. I'm going to give you a couple of questions just so you can think about this in your life. So think about, when is humour useful to you and when is it really not? When would you never use it, sort of personally speaking? Then write down, how might I use humour to achieve X, Y, or Z? So try and link the humour or the fun activity to what you're trying to achieve with your team. And maybe then just go and experiment with it. Just try and use it for yourself, and you'll soon learn ways to bring it into your leadership practice.